Much as I hate to break up happy chatter, I'm going to ask if you folks could find your seats and we'll get started with the class. Okay.
I'm supposed to meet with Gordon at 10:30, and then at 10:45, I'm reading.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. Come on, I did this last week. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Okay. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Peter Bogart. I work with the Caring for Creation Ministry here at Hope Church and have done so, amazingly to me, for some 20 years. It's been a while. Thank you all for being here this morning. Just to let you know, as we mentioned last week, we've been doing this for 20 years. And early on in that discussion about what do we think we mean by creation care, we insisted on being called the Creation Care Ministry, not the Creation Care Committee. And we were working with this kind of notion: is creation care just one of those topics that otherwise progressive Christians tack onto their agenda? You know, you should be for this, you should be for this, you should be for that. Yeah, Christian care, fit that in. And we insisted on saying no. The way in which we engage with creation is intimate to our identity as Christians. It's intimate to our understanding of who God is, where God is, and how God functions. And so we insisted this is an integral part of expressing our own Christianity. So that doesn't always sound like it when we get into talking about organic lawn care. It doesn't necessarily get into it when we start talking about solar panels. But all of those are related to the notion that we have a way of living. And it's demonstrable that in this world we have a way of living which is degrading the environment. And as Christians who believe in God as the creator, we have an obligation to renew, restore, participate with God in making all things new. So that's where we come from as creation care people here at Hope Church. This morning, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Don Triezenberg. Don and I think we began interacting with each other at least 15 years ago. At least 15. 20. I first met Don when he was hawking videos of a documentary called Kilowatt Hours, O-U-R-S. And that film documented what happens when mountaintop removing is pursued in order to feed power plants. And that was the beginning of an understanding that our way of living has impact not only on the earth, but on the people who are being displaced in Appalachia by this mountaintop mining technique. Don was keenly interested in justice issues related to environmental issues at that time, and has continued to do so. And so Don, I want to welcome you to our meeting here this morning, and I know that this is an important topic for you, and we're eager to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Peter. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Good. Well, good morning, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm honored. I look forward to talking with you about, well, I guess the shorthand way of saying what I want to talk about is solar panels on the roof, but as I go through, I hope that you see it's a bigger topic than just that. What I want to say is this talk is really a talk I gave to my home church, Third Reformed Church, about 6 months ago. It's something that I have some strong feelings about, and I felt very free to express them At Third, I mean, that's my church, right? And I can say, this is what we should do. I'm a guest here. I don't have that standing with you. So I tried to think about how to build some standing with you for what I want to say. And so I Googled Hope Church, Holland, Michigan. And this is what came up. This is your web page, landing page. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly. I think if that's an expression of who you are and your mission, what I have to say I might have some standing. But let's see if that works out as we go through this. And as I thought about that, I was reminded of an article that caught my eye many years ago, and I dug it back out. It's a New York Times article from 2015, and I have it here, and I'd like to read just a few of the opening paragraphs. The title of the article is "For the Faithful, Social Justice Goals Demand Action on the Environment." Okay, right? And it begins this way. For an earnest young Christian named Ben Lowe, revelation came on the shores of Lake Tanganyika in Africa. A relentless warming of the lake was reducing the catch of fish, and the people were going hungry. And he had learned of scientific evidence that climate change was to blame. Second paragraph, for the Reverend Brian Sauter, who grew up attending a small Anabaptist church in rural Illinois, the moment came in a college classroom. Studying the fallout from environmental degradation, he learned of poor people who had to walk miles longer every day to gather firewood because the forests were depleted by climate change. For both men, Christian duties that their upbringing had led them to regard as separate, taking care of the earth and taking care of the poor, had merged into one morally urgent problem. Skipping ahead, just one more excerpt. Environmental scientists who are themselves people of faith had known for a long time that the facts and data produced by their research were not sufficient to rouse people to act. Quote, the science is critical, but it's not enough, unquote, said Nathaniel Hitt, a fisheries biologist who is active in a Presbyterian church in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. Quote, science is like a compass. It can tell you where north is, but it doesn't tell you if you want to go north. That's where our morality comes in. Dr. Hitt and the congregation to which he belongs are, to borrow his phrase, heading north. They recently put solar panels on the roof of their church. So I think a church who makes its landing page, Micah 6, do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. A church with such a strong creation care movement, with a background similar to the people mentioned in that New York Times article. Okay, I think we know that the problem of serving the poor and serving the environment are really the same moral issue. So that gives me some standing, even though I'm not a member here, if we can kind of agree on that. And so I'm ready to go, except before we go with the presentation, I'm going to be assuming certain things, and I thought it would be good to kind of put those down on a handout and maybe take just a minute to go through this so you know a little more of what I'm assuming when I have some things to say. Three things that I think we need to know. The first is the climate crisis is real. Okay, the climate crisis is real, and I suspect you wouldn't be here if you didn't agree with that. But it may be that you're thinking you'd like to know some more about that, and so this is a short bibliography here. The first three items are really easy on that bibliography. Some videos and a short magazine article in, of all places, the Rolling Stone, with some names here that should be familiar to you. Steve Ballmer-Predinger, Dave Meyer. Catherine Hayhoe is a name that I hope is familiar to some of you. Who knows about, okay. So we can say some more about her as we get into that, but she is a preeminent climate scientist and an evangelical Christian living in the heart of Texas with a pastor as a husband. So she is very comfortable talking about these issues from both perspectives. And the third one, the magazine, short magazine article by Bill McKibben. I'm sure many of you are fans of Bill as I am, and you'll find that article, I think, very helpful. If you want to dig in a little deeper, there's just no shortage of books on the climate crisis. In the last few years, I've picked out two to list here. Both, I think, are good. The first one, The Future We Choose. If you're in an optimistic mood, read that one. The second one, The Uninhabitable Earth. If you're in a more pessimistic mood, read that one. I'm a scientist by training. My wife is an English teacher. She reads fiction. And so I was pleased to add as the last one in here, a few years back, the New York Times came out with a bibliography of their own, the year you finally read a book about climate change. 20 books in the list, 10 of them are works of fiction, Barbara Kingsolver among others, so you'll find something there. Turning it over, it's important, I think, as we talked together this morning, to remember that the price of climate change is not being paid by us. I'm not suffering, right? But many people around the world are, and they tend to be poor. And I don't want to overlook that point. I want to make that an important part of what we talk about this morning. And so you can read this at your leisure, but I just want to point out the phrases: unprecedented heat, hunger, disease, poverty, displacement. The numbers: 1/3 of the people in the world, 127 million people, 1 million lives a year, 68 million to 135 million, 32 million. We're not talking about incidental stuff here. And these aren't scare statistics. These are from reputable sources: Nature, Lancet, the World Health Organization, the World Bank, Oxfam. There are, the dark print on the handout is live and links you to the source, but you can't do that on a piece of paper, I know, but I can provide the electronic version of this to the church office if you want to pursue any of those links. Finally, at the bottom on the back, the last thing, people are responding. People are responding by setting carbon reduction goals, and that's really what I want to talk to you about this morning, Hope Church and setting a carbon emissions goal for itself. But just to point out that the experts, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says if we're going to survive, we have to make rapid, deep, and immediate cuts in greenhouse gas emissions this decade. In response, all levels of government, national, state, and locally here in Holland, have set aggressive goals of reducing carbon emissions by at least half this decade. And the private sector is also responding. If you think about Holland's economy, right, it's food, furniture, and Ford Motors, right? I mean, that's our economy. And here's some examples. General Motors is publicly committed to reducing greenhouse gases by 72%, Steelcase by 50%, General Mills by 42%. So the private sector is taking this very seriously, as is our civic leadership. So, preparation, background. What do you got to say, Don? Let's see if I can make this work. Oop. Oop. Ken's going to help me out here. Thank you, Ken. Okay. Nothing subtle here. Climate, Compassion, and Hope Church. 4 images and a quote from Catherine Hayhoe. If we are, as Jesus said, to be known by our love for others, then we must care about climate change. I think the message is that I hear, maybe you do, Jesus has compassion for all who suffer from the climate crisis, especially the poor. Solar panels on the roof of Hope Church are a statement that Hope Church cares too. So the first thing to remind ourselves about climate change is that it's very unfair, right? I'm not suffering from climate change. I doubt that you are. But I know that when we burn fossil fuel for our convenience, we contribute to the suffering of others, especially the poor. One example, the people at Bread for the World say that climate change is one of the main causes of human hunger around the world. So I'm wondering how you react to a couple words up on this slide. Does it bother you when I say, when we burn fossil fuel for our convenience? That word kind of gets under my skin a little bit. You know, it makes me, it's not convenient. We really need to have air conditioning in church, right? So, I don't know, that's something to grapple with. I'm wondering if you can think of other examples of people who suffer from climate change.
Okay, now it makes my conversation important. Right? The ocean rising on the East Coast is making the wealthy people move back and displace the poorer people who couldn't live on the coast before because the rich had taken up the coast.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, there's species, loss of species habitat resulting in some disappearing, and some of those, if you wanted to connect that to poor people, are food and substance and a central part of their economy.
All right. Thank you.
Non-unionized field workers in California.
Yeah. I think of one of the big political issues, not only here but around the world, immigration, right? To what degree is that being driven by climate change? I know someone who has written an entire book on the human rights of future generations, and if future generations have rights, then we're interfering with that, right? Okay. So it's unfair. Climate change is unfair, and climate change, it's on us. Okay? I followed closely the process in Holland that led to their commitments to reduce carbon emissions, and I learned something. Households, where I live, where you live, we only produce about 20% of the carbon emissions. GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, right? Carbon emissions. The other 80% comes not from where we personally live, but from where we, what, shop, dine, work, study, worship. Right? That's where it's coming from. If you want to have an impact, that's where it has to be. So I asked Peter to see if he could get me a peek at Hope Church's electric and gas bill for the last year, and using some well-known facts, it was very simple to make a little computation. Hope Church last year, in its electric and natural gas usage here in the building, produced 450,000 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere in 1 year. Okay? Amongst people who write articles about climate change, you don't talk about pounds, you talk about metric tons. So that's about 200 metric tons a year. Recent study says each metric ton costs society about $200. It's another way of quantifying how it affects other people. So that's 400,000 a year. Excuse me, 40,000 a year. When I talk about solar panels that last 25 years, 25 years at that rate is $1 million. But we're not paying it. You're not paying it. Other people are paying that price, right? Through the suffering that they endure because of climate change. Just giving a number like this doesn't help you really, because you have nothing to compare it to. My church, Third Reformed Church, our number, you have 200 metric tons, we had 285 metric tons. Presbyterian Church, I took a look, they have 100 metric tons, much smaller church, right? We just finished at Third setting some goals for reducing that. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But at 285 metric tons at Third Reformed Church, using the Energy Star rating system of EPA, that put us at the 30th percentile for houses of worship in the United States. If I went to a parent-teacher conference and was told my child was ranking in the 30th percentile, I would be concerned. Okay, so what to do? Well, the general guideline is if we're going to survive, we need to cut our carbon emissions in half in this decade. I just want to point out, it's like Lake Wobegon or something. Almost nobody's going to cut in half. Lots of people are not going to try at all. So those of us who are committed to trying, we've got to do a whole lot better than just half for the whole thing to work out. And the emerging strategy in all of the literature is really fairly simple. 3 things. Electrify everything. Okay? Convert your heating to electricity from natural gas. Electrify everything. Why? Because you can buy green electricity, right? BPW already provides about, electricity, fuel is about 15% renewable. Thanks to a new Michigan state law, in the next several years, it's going to have to go up to 50% renewable. You can buy renewable energy credits. You can put solar panels on your roof. Once you electrify everything, it's up to you how much carbon you want to burn to generate your electricity. There's nothing you can do to make natural gas carbon-free. So electrify everything, switch to renewable energy sources, and help your ALICE neighbors do the same. You know what ALICE stands for? Asset limited, income constrained, and employed. The folks who are living paycheck to paycheck in our community. So let's apply this all then to a church, Hope Church, all right? What's the challenge for Hope Church? 2 steps. Set a goal. How much are you going to reduce your carbon emissions? And you didn't ask me for my advice, but I'm going to say 50% is not good enough, right? Because not everybody else is going to be doing it, and we've got to. So how aggressive do you want to be? I've read of churches who have achieved 0 carbon emissions. Is that practical? Is it reasonable? What kind of goal would you want? That's not an easy question to answer. And then make a multiple-year plan to get there. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of steps. Solar panels are not the first step, maybe. Maybe something else is. Maybe solar panels are not there at all. This is another way of saying, making a faith goal, show empathy and compassion for the poor who are suffering from climate change. Make a multi-year plan. It's another way of saying, take action and be accountable. Be accountable to yourselves every year for your progress on the plan. You have lots of options for things in your plan as you dig into it. You can invest in efficiency, you know, LED light bulbs, more efficient electric motors, so on and so forth. Timers on your heat. You're probably doing all of that or much of that. Heat pumps is an interesting example of investing in efficiency. You know, we heat things by burning, but we can also heat things not by creating heat, but by moving heat from one place to another. And that's what heat pumps do for us. And they're much more efficient and much lower in carbon emissions. And of course, solar panels, an obvious example. As you think about what your plan might be, you have faith-based resources to draw on. I'll just mention quickly 2 of them. Solar Faithful is a group that's operating in Michigan. It's a group of investors and church-related folks who are helping churches all over the state put solar panels on their roof. They do it in one of 2 ways. If you ask them, they'll do the project themselves and pay for it and sell you their electricity for 10% less than you're paying for it now. Or they will help you find solar contractors to come up with your own financial plan. First Lutheran Church is an example in North Muskegon. The last data I could find, there were about 25 churches, 30 churches in Michigan with solar panels, but I think it's more than that by now. Another faith-based resource that you might want to draw on is an organization called Interfaith Power and Light. They reach out, they provide a complete education program for churches who are interested, from bulletin inserts to readings to classroom material and all kinds of things. One of the things they do is, if invited, study the church and rank it or rate it, and they have this designation called cool congregation. You can officially become a cool congregation through a series of steps. There are only 11 churches in Michigan. This Interfaith Power and Light is a national organization. There are 11 churches in Michigan that have achieved the designation of cool congregation. Maybe that's your goal. We want to be the 12th in Michigan, right? There are only 3 in western Michigan, 1 in Kalamazoo, 2 in Grand Rapids. 2 in Grand Rapids are LaGrave and Church of the Servant. So you'd be joining good company, I think. But some of you are saying this is going to cost a lot of money, and you're not wrong. But what about the cost? Thanks to governmental action, there are very strong incentives available to churches as well as individuals. For example, in Holland, because we've recently closed our coal plant, the federal rebate for solar panels is 40%. And if you're a creative tax accountant, you can make that a lot more than 40%, but it's at least 40%. The annual savings of most of these kinds of investments that you're going to make are going to pay you back their initial cost after rebates in 10 to 20 years. And after that, the savings continue and accrue directly to the church and its mission. Here's an example. A friend of mine is very active at South Christian High School in Byron Center. They built a brand new state-of-the-art high school 5, 6, 7 years ago. And alongside it, they installed a solar field that provides 60 to 70% of the school's electricity, saving the school $78,000 a year. The initial cost, the sticker cost of those solar panels on that installation was $1.6 million, but they actually only paid $650,000 because they took advantage of all of the tax incentives, and they had some special circumstances which made them even more attractive than typical. But this kind of discounting and investment is fairly typical, and so you can see, doing some simple arithmetic here, it's less than a 10-year payback for them. Other things you might consider in your multi-year plan, right? I don't know, I have a bad habit of counting EV cars in parking lots, right? I don't know how many EV cars you have typically in your parking lot, but maybe a part of your plan is putting some charging facilities in your parking lot. Peter and I are involved in a program called Solar Up, where we encourage local homeowners to put solar panels on their roof through various kinds of gatherings and discounts. Maybe you could do that. For example, Lakeshore Habitat for Humanity is building 40-some houses down on 36th Street. Talked to Don Wilkerson. It's about $5,000 more per home. They could make it all green energy, but they don't have $5,000 more per home. But Community Action House, Scott Rumsa is one of the people we worked with who's put solar panels on his home. I know Scott would love to be able to offer to his clients in his financial advising work the ability to save on their energy bills, right? So God doesn't care where the solar panels are, right? Maybe you decide you now want to put solar panels on your roof, but you're going to help put solar panels somewhere else. Also, maybe you want to work with a low-income church, okay? Maple Avenue Ministries comes to mind, but there are plenty of others, right? So there are lots of options. Be creative, set a goal, going to reduce how much carbon put in the air. I'm responsible as Hope Church, and get to work and make it happen. So, this is the end of my presentation, right? I've said what I have to say. I hope to start a conversation, provoke a conversation, but I'm your guest. It's up to you. But I think, going back to Micah 6, do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. We worship a Savior who is compassionate especially to the poor. How do we show our allegiance to that person, to that Jesus that we worship? We put up crosses, but maybe putting up solar panels on the roof is another way to show our commitment to the compassion of Christ for the poor in this world. Peter likes to use the word repentance. Is this an act of repentance? Is that too strong a word? I don't know. That's for you to think about. What moves me, and I know from the reputation and programs of this church, what moves you is compassion. And I ask you to think about publicly committing your compassion with your action. You know, I have this idea, and I know it's weird, but what if every church in Holland had solar panels on their roof? What would that say about Christianity and faith in Holland? What does it say that none of them do? Who's going to be first? Why not Hope Church? So, open the floor. Comments and discussion.
A question for Paul Elzinga. Several years back, maybe 5 or 8, we had a major renovation at Hope Church, and we had applied some of these principles about reducing our carbon footprint. Could you or Peter perhaps summarize what Hope Church has done recently to put us in the direction toward improving climate?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question. You know, I'm a civil engineer, and we work with mechanical and electrical engineers, and we need to find somebody like that to talk to. I could think of Steve Hamstra, who helped us with our MERV 13 COVID stuff. But there are people out there that do that. It's not me.
Yeah, and there is no way in the world I can one-up Paul Elzinga on mechanical questions. I will say that I was told after the renovation of this space here that the electricity commitment to lighting in this room was reduced by 75%. And I got to tell you, even I don't believe that. 75%? But it's an illustration of when the opportunity presents itself and the necessity perhaps of making a mechanical or building change, that is the golden opportunity to then employ as many energy efficiency tactics as possible, because you're going to spend the money anyway. So when the door is open, take it.
Kind of along those lines, as well as a homeowner, is there a way, if you're going to spend $1,000 or $2,000, what's the best way to spend that if your goal is to use less energy and use more electricity? Does it make sense if you have a perfectly good gas-powered hot water heater to buy a heat pump hot water heater, even though your current one is still working just fine, or your air conditioning unit, or your lawnmower, right? Do you get an electric one just even though your current one is still working, right? At what point is it homeowner? Because again, 20%, homeowners can do a lot of things, and we're still not necessarily going to get to the 50%. But as a homeowner, I can only do so much. Or is it better to spend $5,000 and give it to somebody else who can put solar panels on there, like the Habitat for Humanity example, and just keep using my gas-powered things for now, because in the grand scheme of things, spending $5,000 somewhere else actually makes more sense, even though it doesn't convert my home to using less gas.
I should say, first of all, I'm trained as a theoretical physicist. They bar me from the lab because I am completely destructive and not practical and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. And as a theoretical physicist, I cheer us when we spend $1 billion to get one more data point at a high energy reactor. So I'm not a wise investor of money. But I've read the literature, and the literature would say that's a very powerful observation that you made. Use what you have until it wears out, because there's a huge carbon contribution just in making a new thing, okay? So don't give up on your lawnmower before it gives up on you. Find another way to spend your money. So I'll leave it at that.
So, two questions. The first is a quick one. You indicated that Solar Faithful, I think it was, would install solar panels for free and then charge you 10% less for your electricity as a church.
Yes.
But then you indicated that it costs money to do solar installations, but there's a payback period.
Right.
So I got two different messages there. The Solar Faithful thing, we'll do it for free and we'll reduce your bill, is just like too good to be true. And what's the deal?
Well, when they do it for you, they claim all your rebates. Okay, and I have to put another footnote on that, and Paul will appreciate this. They would much rather work in DTE or consumers territory, because their electric rates are twice what ours are here in Holland. So when they are generating electricity in an area where they can charge consumer rates, they're a lot better off than they are here in Holland.
So that might not be applicable to us.
It is, but they want a big job, not a little job. So we might have to get 2 or 3 churches to work together on that one. But they're investors. They're investors. So there are other investors out there who will, own the power. You're just letting them use your roof. They're claiming all the credits, so that their electricity is cheaper than what the local utility is charging, so they can sell it to you cheaper and still make some money. But if you have trouble raising the money and don't want to take out a loan, they'll do it for you.
Okay, my bigger question relates to something both you and our speaker last week alluded to, and that is the idea of having collective solar farms that we could participate in. If I put solar panels on my roof, that's an expensive installation. It's a high, steep roof. I'm going to have my roof re-roofed. That's an expense that's going to disrupt that. They're going to need to be cleaned. But why couldn't we have an efficient ground level installation that serves hundreds of homes, and I could buy my share of that, rather than putting installations on our own roofs? Do you want to speak to that?
Honestly, I didn't plant that question with David, but it so happens that there's a bill to allow that to happen that's now, right now, being promoted in the Michigan legislature. Write your representative in the Michigan legislature, and you will be able to do that. Okay, it's called community solar. And for those of you who don't know what David's referring to, find any place, where you could put up a whole bunch of solar panels, and you essentially in your home or your church become an investor in that field of solar panels somewhere else. And so you get credit against your electric bill for all that electricity that's generated. The challenge in that is that electricity has to travel from a solar field somewhere to you through BPW's lines, right? And that's not free, and it may not be convenient for BPW. It may not be what they want to be engaged in. So all that needs to be worked out. We are very lucky to have a municipally owned utility that I think has the best interest of our community in mind and not the best interest of its shareholders. So I would be optimistic that we could work that out. But write your congressman.
If I back up a little ways and respond to Peter Christensen's question, as far as if I were to spend $100 or $1,000 or $5,000 as far as energy efficiency in my household, and also apply that as far as our church, I'll try and reflect back what I've learned from Peter Bogart through the years. Step one would be a home energy audit, insulation, sealing up cracks, windows, replacing a refrigerator that's lived a good life with one that's more efficient. It's not as fun as solar panels on the roof, but I hear you get a bigger return on investment, and it's easier to do. Step two would be a home energy audit, where someone who knows the ins and the outs can come through and try and assess where things are lacking or where you'd get the biggest response. That was something that our family had the privilege of doing 5 or 7 years ago, and it was fascinating. It's a fascinating report. You get to kind of geek out on the physics with it and what that looks like. Later on would then be solar panels and ins and outs, which again are more fun. Pivot though, one other piece of low-lying fruit is asking BPW, can we get green energy now? If we don't want to wait to do solar panels or energy audits, what is our energy source for Hope Church right now? Is it natural gas powered or is it renewable energy? That's something where a quick conversation can pivot that. I'd be curious as far as our church, where do we get our energy from? I'd be curious as far as an energy audit. Has anything been done recently in the last 5 or 10 years? And what does that look like? Where are opportunities to become efficient?
So, thank you for that. So, I opened up the conversation, and now I want to try to grab it back a little bit. It's interesting. I thought I was challenging you to set a goal for your church and to be accountable for it. We got a lot of really interesting discussions about things that don't relate to that exactly. So I'm going to try to bring that back. And maybe this does it. Maybe I can appeal to your spirit of competition. Third Reformed Church, just last week, publicly said they are going to reduce, their goal is to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions from 285 metric tons a year to 100 metric tons a year, a 65% reduction by 2030.
We can beat Third Church.
Thank you. I certainly hope you can beat Third Church. Come on. And that's partly in jest, but honestly, I think it's really important that a church have the same guts as our city council and others to say, this is a crisis and we have a goal and we're going to meet it. And say it publicly. BPW gives a report every 2 years to city council on how they're doing. I mean, this is not fooling around. And it's not political fluff. It's real, and there's accountability. And I think it's also a matter of testimony. It's a matter of witness. You could set a goal and achieve it and not tell anybody, just like you can profess your faith and live your faith, but not tell anybody that you're a Christian, right? I mean, we have a message. Evangelical is kind of a bad word these days, but we do believe we have a message to tell. I'm not a theologian, but that's what evangelical means to me, you know? And I think this is a powerful way that we tell our message, not by choice. If people look and see we're not doing anything, that sends a message. If people look and see we are doing something, that also sends a message. Right? Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly. What would it say if every church in Holland had solar panels on their roof? And I think it would say a lot. And I think Hope Church ought to beat Third Church and get it done.
I'd like to speak to your comments about this being an issue related to the poor, and that they are the beneficiaries of whatever we do about improving the climate situation. It's the first time I've really kind of focused on that notion that it's the poor who benefit, because it's always been my sense that everyone benefits in the end. I mean, we keep hearing about, you know, what it's like, you know, a number of decades ahead if we don't do certain things. And I've always seen that cast in the light of doing something for everyone.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I saw in California, and you haven't mentioned anything about that, is putting solar panels over parking spaces. And that seems like, as Dave was saying, having something that was lower and easier for installation and caring for it, and yet we use that space for vehicles. It really doubles for a purpose and gives some shield, and then we're protecting our blacktop, which is absorbing too much heat. So I think maybe that might be something we should think about.
Thank you.
It's Paul. It's Paul again. Thinking back on Judy's question, comprehensive engineering were the people that did the mechanical studies for us here, and most recently they did a similar study on the kitchen renovation. And I understand that they've been working with Third Church. I'm glad to hear that Third Church just took the action that they did. Do you have any background information on how they handled how much did they participate in your decision at Third? Ken Riegler and his team are the ones that worked with us.
I have not been inside the technical consulting work at Third, so I really can't speak to that. I hammered on the the consistory at Third to say you got to think about heat pumps. They hammered back. Our consultants say heat pumps don't match our church. So I know they're listening to their consultants. That was frankly a frustrating answer for me to hear, but nonetheless, they went ahead and accepted the goal of a 65% reduction, and so who am I to quibble with how they do that?
The other thing I didn't mention is wind. Holland has. The other thing we haven't talked about is wind energy. The BPW has a share in a number of wind farms, and that is another way of becoming efficient.
What I learned in going through the process at Third is that it's very possible. There are lots of levers. It's not like, oh my goodness, how are we going to cut our energy or carbon emissions by 60, 70, 80%? That's not an impossible challenge. It's very doable, in part because our electricity is, in a few years, is going to be 50% green. That's huge, right? Solar panels can provide the other half of your electricity completely green. That's huge, right? So just by living here and being halfway sensible, you're kind of halfway there. Then you have to ask, what other kind of decisions do we have to bring in? And they're not impossible, right, Paul? I mean,
I'll stop talking after this, but when Steve was first involved, Steve Hampstead, excuse me, at Third, he had the idea we're going to take the source of energy out of the groundwater with wells. And I don't know what you call it, but
Yep.
do you remember any of that conversation?
I was not involved in those conversations. So I didn't come to bring a challenge to you to make some great sacrifice, to worship without air conditioning like your founders did. You know, I'm not even asking that, right? Isn't that how it works in everything else? You make a decision. What's important? You set a goal. You make a commitment. You make a plan. You tell people about it. You revisit it, and you do it. The climate crisis is going to be the throughput storyline of civilization for the next 100 years. Get involved. Make a plan. Live it. We can't, as a church, ignore the crisis of this generation and the next. We have to be visibly active in it. It's not that hard, but you have to get started.
I was going to say, let's end on that note. I don't want to distract from it, but since Bob handed me the microphone, churches are notorious for having underutilized space, and Hope Church isn't alone in that respect. Our sanctuary, basically is used one day a week. Same for this room. It has to be heated during the winter. Solar panels are one solution. You talk about having impractical ideas. How about this one? Let's have multiple congregations meet in this building. We would hold to our Sunday worship, have the Presbyterians come on Monday, the Christian Reformed on Tuesday, Lutherans on Wednesday. What do you think? And so on and so forth.
So this has been a great discussion, and I just want to nominate Paul Elzinga and Peter Bogart to be on a committee to take Peter Christensen's question about cost effectiveness of different options, including Mary's intriguing idea of building an open lid over our parking lot that could be both protection for the cars and the walking into church, but more importantly, a solar farm. What's practical and feasible and cost effective? I don't know, but there's some smarter people than I am, like Peter and Paul, that can help us discern that. And Paul needs a new project too.
Take it away.
Okay. David, interesting you would raise that point. I did not plant David, but I wanted to finish this morning by picking up on the challenge that Don is offering. We have had discussions within the Creation Care Ministry about how do we move forward at being more responsible with our energy use here in this building. We do want to form a working group that will go through the steps that are necessary, number one, to properly audit the building, properly identify targets that could be met, and then begin to bring forward proposals in appropriate committees, building committee in particular. Here's something we would like to move forward on. If you would like to be part of that, I need to hear from you. If I don't hear from you, I'm going to call you. But we need to engage in a process that understands the problem, diagnoses the problem, and brings forth solutions that helps us be more carbon neutral on this building site. That may or may not include solar, but those are the practical working business sort of decisions we need to make. I would also add that the conversation today has revolved around community solar again. You recall last week that we introduced petitions, which we want to deliver to the Michigan Senate. There's a table out in the gathering area. That petition is here again this week. If you didn't sign it last week, I invite you to sign it this week, and we'll get all those petitions delivered to the appropriate committee at the Michigan Senate. So, and I can't resist saying this. The conversation came up about my personal carbon footprint. I hate to say it, but the most impactful thing you can do to lower your personal carbon footprint is not use air travel. Nothing skews your personal carbon footprint more than air travel. So I'm not sure what that means in terms of frequently flying, once every 10 years, but I'll let you struggle with that. Don, thank you for being here this morning. And
Okay, and from that, I want to take you to next week where we'll have Paula Thornton Greer, President and CEO of Planned Parenthood of Michigan. Recently, at least in the Ottawa County level, reproductive rights have sort of come to the surface again. Come next week to learn more about that and learn about our own church's response to issues of reproductive rights. And now, since it's Pizza Sunday, we request your cooperation in setting up chairs and tables for Pizza Sunday. Thank you all.